I failed you. I have never read an Absolute comic yet, and I read Absolute Batman for the first time, and I finally understand Batman. When you strip away billions, when you take away a mansion, a bat cave, the global travel, the gadgets funded by Wayne Enterprises, what do you have left? This is not a rhetorical question, this is the entire premise of Absolute Batman, and what remains is a more dangerous, more focused Bruce Wayne we've seen in decades, a man forged in the fire of the working class. To understand the psychology of this version of Batman, you have to understand the life he came from, because that detail matters. In the main DC continuity, Bruce Wayne was born into generational wealth. The Wayne family is Gotham's equivalent to old money royalty, philanthropy, powerful, respected. When Thomas Wayne and Martha Wayne were murdered in Crime Alley, the tragedy is enormous, but Bruce falls into an enormous safety net. He has Alfred, Wayne Manor, Wayne Enterprises, and those resources to train with the greatest martial artists, detectives, and scientists on the planet. His grief launches him into a globe-trotting education. He is a man shaped by his loss, yes, but he is also a man who possesses that loss with unlimited resources. Tear that all away, and in Absolute Batman, you see something completely opposite. Thomas Wayne is an elementary school teacher, Martha Wayne is a social worker. This is a Bruce who grew up in Crime Alley, not as someone who's passing through it, but somebody who actually lived in it. He belongs to that neighborhood. He was raised by people who chose public service careers over wealth accumulation. And critically, Thomas Wayne does not die in the alley after a night at the theater. He is killed in a mass shooting at the Gotham City Zoo during a class field trip while doing his job. And critically, Thomas Wayne did not die in the alley after a night at the movies. The tragedy is not the collateral damage of privilege moving through a dangerous neighborhood. It is a working class father cut down in an act of senseless public violence while doing exactly what good, dedicated working class people do every day, simply showing up. Martha Wayne survives. She is still alive in the present day of the series, and Bruce Wayne does not have an Alfred as a father figure and a butler. He has a community. He trains at gyms run by Killer Croc. He builds skills through the city itself, through Gotham's infrastructure and its people, rather than through the resources of a private empire. By the time we meet him in issue 1, Bruce Wayne is about 24 years old, standing at 6'6", built like a weapon, working as a civil engineer across multiple city departments. He has degrees and expertise in applied mechanics, criminal psychology, chemistry, and military theory. And here's the crucial part from the psychology standpoint. He earned all of it. He's not necessarily somebody who was paid for the world's best tutors, because he built himself into something piece by piece. The same way you build anything where you don't come for money, through effort, discipline, obsession, and stubbornness that borders on pathology. Now I want to get into the psychological meat of this, if I should say, because this is where it gets a little bit fascinating. There is a real and documented distinction in psychology between what we call the intrinsic toughness, forged through this scrutiny, versus the kind of resilience that wealth can buy. And Snyder has built the entire version of Batman around that distinction. When psychologists study resilience, the ability to bounce back from adversity, to function under sustained stress, to keep pushing when systems are working against you, they find that it was shaped enormously by the resources that were available to us in childhood. It's not financial resources, social capital, community ties, the sense that the people around you have your back because they are paid to, but because they are generally connected to one another. Traditionally, Bruce Wayne has Alfred. He is profoundly isolated in many iterations. His grief is processed largely alone, even when surrounded by allies, because the transactional nature of his inherent position makes genuinely vulnerable feel like a weakness. He built a persona that is deliberately impenetrable. Batman is, in many traditional readings, a suit of armor, not just physically but emotionally, a wall between Bruce and the world he refuses to let hurt him again. However, Absolute Batman does something differently. He has a community. He has close friends. Oswald Cobblepot, Edward Enigma, Killer Croc, Selena Kyle are not people he selected or required. They are people he grew up alongside. They are his people in the truest sense. And this shifts the psychology underpinning of why he does what he does in a profound way. Traditional Batman's motivation is frequently analyzed as a form of prolonged grief response, specifically what psychologists call complicated grief or trauma-bonded identity formation. Bruce Wayne's identity is the night his parents died. The costume, the mission, the obsession, all of it is in some way a coping mechanism that never resolved, a grief that is channeled into action because the alternative was unbearable stiffness. Absolute Batman carries grief too. The loss of his father is real and devastating, but his motivation feels more connected to the psychology called moral injury and collective trauma response. He is not just a wounded individual who built himself into a weapon. He is a person from a community that has been systematically failed again, and failed once more. He watched his father, a good man doing a good job, murdered by a kind of violence that flourishes in a city where the powerful look after themselves and everyone else is left to manage. And his response is not to retreat into a private crusade, it is to stand in the middle of Gotham and refuse to let its people be consumed. That is a fundamentally different psychological engine. Traditional Batman's heroism often reads as a righteous rage of one man against chaos. Absolute Batman's heroism reads as solidarity, and solidarity, psychologically speaking, is one of the most resilient forces humans have ever developed. It is that thing that allows people with nothing to do extraordinary things. It is the engine of every working class movement in history, and it is the thing that makes Batman feel genuinely threatening to power in a way that his classic counterpart never quite could. Scott Snyder said himself when he was interviewed by DC, he wanted a Batman who always punches up, and he noted with striking honesty that it was generally difficult for a generational billionaire to punch up. When Bruce Wayne of the main continuity fights crime, he's operating from inside the power structure. He is, in a very real sense, part of the system he claims to oppose. Absolute Batman is outside that system, and that changes everything about what his crusade means. This brings me to the most fascinating and unexplored dimension of Absolute Batman, the psychology of anti-authoritarianism and how it operates differently depending on whether it comes from privilege or lived experience. Anti-authoritarianism is the resistance to centralized accountable power. It has historically been romanticized in superhero storytelling. Batman, across most of his iterations, is coded as anti-authoritarian. He works outside the law, he doesn't answer to police or to the government. He is a lone operator who refuses to be institutionalized. But traditional Bruce Wayne's anti-authoritarianism is, and I want to be precise about this, the anti-authoritarianism of somebody who already is powerful enough to afford it. He disobeys the law because he has the wealth, the connections, and the legal institutions to do so without existential consequences. When traditional Batman refuses to answer to the authorities, it is a defiance of a man who could buy and sell most of the authorities 10 times over. It is, in a very real sense, the defiance of one form of power against another. There is a term in political psychology called elite deviance. The idea that wealthy, powerful individuals operate by different rules than anyone else, and that their apparent rebelliousness often reinforces rather than undermines existing hierarchy. Traditional Batman, however much we admire him, occupies a space adjacent to that. His vigilantism ultimately protects a social order in which men like Bruce Wayne sit near the top. Absolute Batman's anti-authoritarianism comes from a completely different psychological place. It comes from someone who has personally experienced what it means when an institution fails the people they are supposed to serve. It comes from someone who has watched his father killed by public violence in a city where the wealthy have very political incentive to underfund public safety in poor neighborhoods. It comes from someone who works for city departments and sees from inside those institutions exactly how they prioritize the interests of capital over the interests of ordinary people. When this Bruce Wayne refuses to defer to authority, it is not because he is powerful enough to do it without consequences. It's because he sees the consequences of deference. He has watched what happens when people in Crime Alley trust the system to protect them. He knows what the cost is. His anti-authoritarianism is not an ideal adopted from the position of safety. It is a survival strategy that emerged from the lived experience and the reality of being someone in a system that the system wasn't built for. Psychologically, this is the difference between what researchers call reactive autonomy the defiance of existing power by someone who has their own power to leverage, and disciplined autonomy, the refusal to surrender agency by someone who understands that surrendering means surrendering everything. Traditional Batman has reactive autonomy, and principle autonomy forged through genuine experience of systematic failure is far more psychologically durable. It cannot be bought off because there's no version of the offer that addresses the actual problem. It cannot be negotiated away because the things being protected, community, dignity, the right of ordinary people to be consumed by forces they cannot control, are not things that can be compensated with money or status. Absolute Batman is not anti-capitalist polemic, but rather is a story that takes seriously the idea that the hero's legitimacy should come from where they stand in relation to power, from the bottom up rather than the top down. And it uses the specific tools of psychological character construction, grief response, community-based motivation, principled anti-authoritarianism, the trauma of collective rather than the purely individual loss, to make the argument feel true in your gut rather than just in your head. Absolute Batman is a story about what it means to fight something bigger than yourself outside of the resources to match it. It is a story about where resilience actually comes from, the answer it gives, community, principle defiance, and the refusal to accept the hierarchy that was handed to you. It is one that resonates deeply, honestly, and differently than anything the classic Bruce Wayne has offered in a long time. If you haven't been reading it, just give Issue 1 a try. If you stayed to the end, thank you. You get a cookie. I don't know. But I want to thank you for watching my video. If you don't mind doing all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, it really helps my videos in the algorithm. Please let me know what other characters you would like me to do as a kind of character analysis in future videos. And comment below who your favorite absolute character has been so far. I'm Anderson. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.